So I'm just delighted to be here today to talk about an issue which is certainly close to my heart, deforestation. It also happens to be at the heart of Unilever's business strategy as well, and I'll come back to that. It's also a great pleasure to be sharing this podium with WWF. Should be no surprise in that Unilever have been working with the WWF for a long period of time now, 30 years or so. In 1995, we jointly founded the Marine Stewardship Council. In 2003-04, we were with WWF right at the beginnings of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. We've been with them on the RTRS and on the Beef Roundtable as well. It's an organisation for whom we have immense respect. I need to say also that Meg Symington, who's going to talk to you later, is a real expert, a real pro in this area. I'm an amateur. My knowledge is one question deep. So when we come to questions, and we will, it'll be her that you'll want to address them to. What I want to do, if I can remember what's on my slides, I want to tackle a complex subject, and it is a very complex subject, and I've got 15 minutes and I've got 15 slides, so you can count them down if you like. And I want to structure what I've got to say under those four headings. Firstly, I want to explain, and I have to always do this for an American audience, who or what is Unilever, and I'll give you a little bit of insight into that. I then want to address this question: is why should a consumer goods company be interested in deforestation? What does it have to do with their business model? I then want to talk a little bit about what we're doing about it. And finally, I want to venture a few ideas as to what government and public policy can do in this area as well. So, Unilever. Unilever is a global company. It's a consumer goods company. We have revenues of about $60 billion, and we sell our products in every single country of the world. We think our products are present in more than half the households on the planet, but certainly we know that 2 billion times a day, every day, somebody somewhere will pick up a Unilever product and use it. So we have considerable geographical reach. You won't know us as Unilever, but hopefully you will know us by our brands. So this is a selection of the brands that we sell in the United States. They are teas like Lipton, ice cream like Breyers and Ben & Jerry's, meal sauces like Ragu and Bertolli, spreads or margarines like I Can't Believe It's Not Butter and Country Crock, Hellmann's mayonnaise, Skippy peanut butter, and then a range of what we call personal care brands, brands like Dove and Caress and Lever 2000, and deodorants like Axe and Degree, and then a range of hair care products. So we sell basic consumer goods products, things which people use every day. And actually in the United States, Unilever is a pretty sizable entity. It has 11,000 employees. It has some 25 manufacturing sites spread across 17 states. It has in Trumbull, in Connecticut, a really important global R&D center from which we do our research on our skincare products for the world. And it has its headquarters in Englewood Cliffs in New Jersey. And with sales of 9 billion, it's a reasonable size company in the United States. It's about sort of 14 or 15% of Unilever globally. So that's the corporate propaganda over and done with. You know who Unilever is now. I'm going to test you later on and interrogate you as to which of these brands you use. But we'll move on to the subject at hand, which is deforestation. So why are consumer goods companies like Unilever, like the other consumer goods companies in this room, Kraft would be another one, why are they interested in this complex subject of deforestation? Well, the really short answer to that is that the commodities that we buy create some of the economic incentives for farmers in different parts of the world to chop down trees. Now, those are big commodities like palm oil, like soy, like paper and timber, and beef products coming from cattle. It's assumed, and Meg would be able to give you more detail on this, that just those 5 commodities account for more than 50% of global deforestation. Whatever it is, that's less important. But the reality is that these ingredients, these raw materials, which are at the heart of our supply chain, are some of the drivers of deforestation. And therefore, whether we like it or not, this is our responsibility, this is our obligation to address this issue. We don't grow any of these things directly, but we purchase them, and we purchase them in very large quantities indeed. So take palm oil as an example. Palm oil is the most commonly used vegetable oil in the world. It's much less used in the United States, but it is really very ubiquitous all around the world. It is present in about 1/3 of the products that you'll buy in the supermarket. It won't always be labelled as palm oil. It'll be often labelled as an oleochemical of some kind or another, the feedstock for which has been palm oil. So it's in cookies, it's in shampoos, it's in peanut butter. It's been in a vast range of products that you will be consuming every day. It is also a product for which, or a resource for which, demand is growing at an extremely rapid rate. You can see the chart on the right there. And that demand is being driven by population and by rising GDP. And that combination of things is creating huge demand for this ingredient, and therefore it is putting more and more pressure on forests. And why does it put pressure on forests? Simply because this is a crop, the oil palm, that only grows within 5 degrees of the equator. So it's tough to grow it in Finland or somewhere. This is absolutely an equatorial plant. And it brings with it a variety of social and environmental issues. The environmental issues we will go on address a little bit more today, but they are to do with biodiversity. And it's not just the little species. We're talking about some of the people at much higher end of the food chain who are threatened by this. The orangutan, the Sumatran tiger. It has an impact on deforestation as well. And then it brings with it a whole variety of social issues. These are land tenure issues, and these are very complex issues for the industry to address. So I've just picked out palm as one of these commodities, just to give you a sense of how difficult it is to get the balance right here between the economic needs and indeed the food security needs of a product like this, and then some of the unintended social and environmental consequences. So why does deforestation matter? Well, deforestation accounts for, if you accept the IPCC data on this, between sort of 16–20% of global greenhouse gases. So this is much more than the entire transport sector. Bigger than all the cars, trains, planes, trucks and lorries around the place. And we kind of spend a lot of time thinking about that. But forests are a bigger component of, or account for a bigger source of greenhouse gases than pretty well anything else on its own. It does have, through deforestation, a devastating impact on biodiversity, because these forests are home to millions of species, some of which are still undiscovered, many of which, it's important to remember, find their way ultimately into pharmaceutical products, and the forests that we're talking about are areas which are trawled by the pharmaceutical industry for materials which, ultimately could be of enormous value to us as well. And the terrible thing about this is that deforestation does not need to happen. We can meet even the most optimistic estimates of future demand for palm and soy and beef without chopping down another tree. The facts are absolutely clear on that. There is sufficient land for us to do this without encroaching into high conservation value forests. But yet, all the time, as we speak, hectares of really irreplaceable forest will be being chopped down in countries like Indonesia, very often associated with the cultivation of the crops I'm talking about. So what's Unilever's approach to this? Well, Unilever's corporate strategy has a central ambition of growth, to double the size of the company, but to double the size of the company without increasing its overall environmental footprint. And when we measure our environmental footprint, we take it from upstream, the sourcing of our raw materials, all the way through to the consumer use in the home. So we're accepting responsibility for what happens in our supply chain. We're also accepting responsibility for what you do with our products when you get them home. So we take a very broad view of our responsibilities in this area. And the roadmap for achieving that goal is set out in a plan that we launched in November 2010, which is called the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. And that's a document where there are sort of 50 or 60 quantified, time-bound targets against which we as a business expect to be judged. And one of the central objectives of that is to source all of our agricultural raw materials sustainably, and to do that by 2020. And then underneath that heading, there are then very precise targets for the commodities we're talking about. So palm, we're committed to draw all of our palm oil from certified sustainable sources by 2015. Soy, paper and timber a bit later. Now, I'll just go on and talk a little bit about how we deal with that. The way we tackle it is fundamentally through the roundtables. These are multi-stakeholder bodies which are voluntary standards established by all of the actors in the industry, whether you're a grower, whether you're a miller or a processor, whether you're a user, whether you're an NGO, whether you're in government, you will have had a role in defining these standards. And bodies like the RSPO, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, or the RTRS, the Roundtable for Responsible Soy, have established principles and criteria which are accepted across the industry as to what would constitute sustainable cultivation of those crops. That's one approach. Another approach is via certification. Those two things are often very closely linked, and we would use certifying bodies like the Rainforest Alliance, like Fair Trade, like UTZ in Europe. And where we can't do this through those kinds of mechanisms, then we have our own Sustainable Agriculture Code, which is an open source document. It's on the web, it's been peer reviewed, it is available to anyone to use. It's been around for about 10 years now and serves us well, but that sets the standards against which we ask to be judged. So that's how we're tackling it when we're working on our own. But what happens with these big commodity crops is that it's very often easier to work in big industrial coalitions. Because however big a buyer we might be of any one of these crops, or Walmart might be, or Kraft might be, or Coca-Cola might be, we are tiny in terms of the total market. And therefore our ability to exert real market leverage and affect change is pretty limited. So we work under the umbrella of a body called the Consumer Goods Forum. It's a body that brings together all the global retailers and their international suppliers, the kinds of companies you see there. There are 400 members, and the combined revenues of the organization are in excess of $2 trillion. So it's a material part of the global economy. And this organization Cancun Climate Change Conference, publicly committed to eliminate deforestation from all of our supply chains for all of those commodity crops. This was announced by Muhtar Kent of Coca-Cola at Cancun about 18 months ago, and we are now busily engaged in trying to move this forward. Indeed, one of the principal reasons why I'm in Washington, we're talking to many of the government agencies here to see what help they might be able to provide in the form of a public-private partnership to deliver on this very important goal. And I certainly invest a lot of my time in this area, but potentially if we could get this organisation, the Consumer Goods Forum, all pointing in the right direction, all moving ahead in step, this could be an enormously powerful force for change. And certainly governments around the world are very interested and do want to help, and I don't think the US government is an exception to that. We're making pretty good progress. This is just Unilever's numbers on palm oil. In 2011, we sourced more than 800,000 tons of our palm oil from certified sustainable sources. We will easily get to our target, our 2015 target, on this crop. So this can be done. And many other businesses are making really good progress as well. Kraft are working really hard on this. Nestle are working really hard on this. And so we are getting results. And finally, how can governments help? Well, I think governments can help a lot. There is a lot that the private sector can do, and it's important that the private sector doesn't sit on its hands and wait until government comes along and tries to address this problem. We are getting on in doing the things that I've been trying to describe. But there are a number of other things which government can help on. One is this whole very complex area of land use. There is only a finite amount of land in the world. Big fan of Mark Twain, and his old adage was, buy land, they aren't making any more of it. And that's absolutely true. And from the finite amount of land, we have to feed today 7 billion people. In 30 years' time, there'll be 2 billion more of us. So how we use that land is incredibly important. And there are conflicting needs for it. The most important need is food, I beg your pardon. But increasingly, there are the energy industry is keen on biofuels. Our own industry is keen on biopolymers to make replacements for plastics. Competing trend. Government has to really oversee this and ensure that the land is used properly, and land use planning in countries like Indonesia, for example. Second, there's a huge amount that government can do to increase yields and productivity in agriculture. Huge amounts. So the more we can raise the floor here and have individual farmers producing more, then the less need there will be to encroach into forested areas. And a big part of that is about investing in smallholders. The World Bank reckons there are sort of, the figures seem to vary, but at least 500 million smallholder farmers who are very inefficient. If we can raise their productivity, we make a big, big step towards addressing this problem. And governments are pretty good at that. They've got a good track record of doing that, and they need to do a lot more. I can't read my own slide there. Oh, yes, and the whole issue of so-called degraded lands, because there's an awful lot of forest which has been chopped down, and that land can now be put to good use. And so degraded lands, how you use them, how you engage with the people who are sitting on those degraded lands is an important part of this solution. And finally, governments, I believe, should be very supportive of these roundtables. So, to finish, I just want to finish on the urgency of this. It's essential that we reach a tipping point in this battle against deforestation, because this is an area where we really don't have much time. These forests are going at a terrifying rate, a really very rapid rate indeed. You'll see in a minute about great progress in Brazil, but in places like Indonesia, we are not seeing that. And once these forests have gone, if they were to go, we are condemning our children and grandchildren to a very difficult world. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Mick.
Thank you so much. While we switch the PowerPoints here, I just wanted to, a few people I missed in the audience. I think I didn't read the back page here. Todd Shelton with World Wildlife Fund, who we work with and who's head of their government relations. Todd, I don't know where you are. Oh, there you are, Todd. Tom Langan with Unilever, who we work with on a day-to-day basis, and who has been such a big loyal supporter of us over the years. Tom Albert with Feld Entertainment, and they've been a long-time supporter. Okay. Now rolling on. Meg Symington from Managing Director of the Amazon from World Wildlife Fund. So, excuse me, I know it's tight.
So it's a pleasure to be here. As Gavin mentioned, I'm going to take you down to earth in one very special place, and that's the Amazon, where deforestation is a huge issue. As I was starting to prepare this talk, I realized that it's been almost exactly 30 years since I first went to the Amazon. I had just graduated from college, and I was going on to graduate school to study spider monkeys in the Peruvian Amazon. And I had never been out of the country, so this was quite an eye-opener for me. We traveled to, where I did my field work was actually right here. Sort of a blank spot on the map where we would leave from Cusco, drive over the Andes. The road went east over the Andes 3 days a week and west to the Pacific 3 days a week, single lane road. On Sundays it went both ways, and nobody wanted to drive on Sundays. That was a recipe for disaster. So after we got over the Andes, then we would take a boat upriver for 2 days to my research station. We used to say, all the people who worked there, we were 4 days from an appendectomy. It was an incredible eye-opener for a biologist recently graduated from college. I feel like I had died and gone to heaven. The scope of the Amazon, the scale of it, is absolutely incredible. So from where I worked right here, the elevation is 300 meters. So all the way to the mouth of the Amazon, it only goes down 300 meters. Another indication of the scale is that island right there in the mouth of the Amazon is the size of Switzerland. So you could fit all of Western Europe in the Amazon basin. 10% of the world's species, 15% of the fresh water, 1,200 species alone we've discovered in the last 10 years. It's an amazing treasure trove of biodiversity. But it's important for more than biodiversity. It's home to 33 million people, including about 2.5 million indigenous people. Most of those people are dependent on the resources of the Amazon for their livelihoods. Where I worked, we would actually have natives come down the river to trade fish and papayas for our soap and matches, and maybe some Unilever soap even. Some of these people live in poverty, and many of them are politically marginalized. So this is the graph. We have the best data for Brazil because Brazil's been tracking its deforestation in the Amazon for many years. But some of the same trends exist in other countries as well, although they're probably 10, 20 years behind Brazil in terms of the trajectory of the growth. The red bars show deforestation from 1998 to 2010. 1996, as you can see, was the all-time high year. It reached a peak of 28,000 square kilometers. That's an area the size of the state of Maryland, and that's in a single year. So this just shows you where that deforestation is occurring in the Amazon. That red is where the forests are now gone forever. We call it the arc of deforestation, this arc of deforestation here. Along the lower edge of the Amazon, where most of the pressure is coming from development of agro-commodities. Mato Grosso this year was the #1, the leading state for deforestation in the Amazon, and most of that is from pressure from agricultural development. Once the trees are cut, the land is cleared by burning, releases large amounts of carbon dioxide. In fact, 75% of Brazil's CO2 emissions are from deforestation. And this is what you're left with frequently at the end. About 80% of all deforestation in the Amazon is caused by cattle ranching. And it's low productivity cattle ranching. It's less than 1 head per hectare. So it's critical in terms of our thinking about how to conserve the Amazon and how to stop deforestation. It's absolutely critical that we address the issue of extensive cattle ranching. And Gavin's already talked a little bit about some of the initiatives that WWF is deeply involved in, like the Global Beef Roundtable. And there is actually a regional beef roundtable. There's a Grupo de Pecuario Sustentável in Brazil that fits within that global roundtable. So they're working in Brazil on the principles and criteria by which cattle ranching could be called sustainable. In addition to the roundtable process, we're involved in, there is a moratorium currently in place. There's an agreement among by many buyers, some of the largest slaughterhouses in the Amazon, not to source animals from areas that have been deforested since June 2009. And we're also working on better management practices. How can we improve productivity? If you could just double the number of heads per hectare, you would get twice the productivity on half the land. And of course, continued law enforcement is also very important. The Brazilian government has really stepped up its enforcement of illegal deforestation, but now with the proposed changes in the Brazilian Forest Code, we're not sure how lasting that progress can be. So in addition, I've mostly put in the slide just because it's so amazing just to see it. This is harvesting and planting soy in Mato Grosso. And although cattle ranching is the most important and biggest threat to the Amazon, agricultural expansion related to other commodities such as soy meal, soy oil is also important. Brazil is now the world's #1 producer of sugar, orange juice, coffee, and tobacco, and they're #2 in soy meal, and soy oil. And as Gavin also mentioned, WWF is a major force behind the Roundtable on Responsible Soy, which is hoping to make soy production more sustainable. But now I want to talk, in addition to the work on commodities, WWF has been for many years involved in on-the-ground conservation in the Amazon. One of our flagship projects is called the Amazon Regional Protected Areas Program. It was launched by President Cardoso in Brazil in 1999, and then it was President Lula here, shown with WWF's Director General Claude Martin, inaugurated the program at the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development in South Africa. It's a public-private partnership between the government in Brazil and WWF and the Brazilian Biodiversity Fund, Funbio. And for those of you who are on the Hill and involved with appropriations, GEF has been one of the major funders of the program over the last 10 years, together with the government of Germany. The goal of ARPA is to safeguard 60 million hectares of the Brazilian Amazon. That's an area almost twice the size of the U.S. National Park System. So to show you what we've achieved over the last 10 years, this shows the protected areas and indigenous territories in the Brazilian Amazon in 2000, before the beginning of ARPA. And this is at the end of phase 1 of ARPA, at the end of 2009. It's been the world's most successful protected area creation program to date. 24 million hectares of new protected areas, an area about the size of the state of Oregon, have been established. And it's also formed a buffer. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. It's formed a, if you remember, the arc of deforestation was right here. And so it's formed a buffer there with those protected areas actually serving to confront and stop the moving edge of deforestation there in the arc of deforestation. ARPA is now entering its second phase. The goals are to create 13.5 million more hectares of protected areas and to basically consolidate the whole system. And right now we're struggling with the long-term financial sustainability issues. WWF is currently working with Funbio and the government of Brazil to address these long-term financial sustainability issues. So in addition to all it's done for biodiversity, the species that have been discovered in these ARPA protected areas. I could go on and on and on about them. But it's not only good news for biodiversity, it's also good news for decreasing deforestation. Research has shown that the decrease, if you look between 2004 and 2009, that steep drop-off right there, about 40% of that decrease was due to the creation of protected areas. And that's because basically the whole land speculation, the advance of the frontier, has been stopped by that. The rest of that, increasing enforcement is also important, and increasing issues with production practices for these commodities. Those are sort of the three legs of the stool, I would say. So just briefly, I know we're running short on time. We want to have some time for questions, but I just do want to mention that there is a large portion of the Amazon basin that falls outside of Brazil. Many people aren't even aware of that, but there are 8 other countries that have portions of the Amazon forest within their territories. About 40% of it is outside Brazil. And the connection and integration among these countries is just growing by leaps and bounds. It's growing exponentially. Remember how I mentioned that one-lane road? This is now the road going from Brazil to Peru. And there's a bridge there across the river, and you can actually see it says the port of Ica is 1,400 kilometers away. And that road is now paved all the way to the Pacific. And that's the first time there's been a paved connection just within the last 2 years. And you can see what the results of that road are right here in vivid detail. That pink is the deforestation, and that's the route of the Interoceanic Highway. And I resonated so much with this doesn't need to happen necessarily. What Gavin said is that right along the road there, if you look at along the border with Brazil there, all of that is forest concessions and Brazil nut concessions, and those can be viable livelihoods for many of the people that live there. We just need to support those livelihoods, make them more efficient, make them more productive, so that there is a viable alternative to deforestation. And these are some guys holding some Brazil nuts, and I hope you'll all join me in being committed to conserving a living Amazon. Thank you. Oh, and I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to introduce my colleague, Carrie Cesario, who is here, who is head of our forest team at WWF. So if you have any tough questions after the ones that Gavin can't answer and I can't answer, then they'll go to Carrie.
Okay, so we've got a roving microphone. If you all want to, if there's any questions, I'm going to first, before we start the questions though, Kristen, it's your birthday today, so we're going to all say happy birthday to you. Thanks so much. Not sure why you would want to come to our briefing for your birthday lunch, but I'm very flattered. I guess it just shows ICCF's power, maybe the good food at Charlie Palmer's. Anybody who needs to go, though, please go. Anybody needs to run out of here, and then we're going to do questions afterwards. So we told people we would end at 1:15. We're a couple minutes over, so if you do need to go immediately, and then we'll do some questions if anybody has some. And then I would say everybody's welcome to remain afterwards. Okay, questions? Anybody, any questions for we have here? I guess they're very comprehensive. Oh, Kristen, with our first question.
It sounds like models are working well in Brazil, but not necessarily Indonesia. Are there ways that we can be replicating and making scalable some of these things for transferring pilot programs?
That's a very good question. Since I don't work in Indonesia, I'm going to pass that on to Carrie.
Yeah, I think that's the hope. I mean, definitely as Gavin mentioned, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil can play a similar role to the Roundtable on Sustainable Soy. I think there are also some unique challenges to Indonesia that present hurdles. And then you additionally have pulp and paper as another driver, and we don't really have that as much as a challenge in Brazil. But I'd be more than happy to talk with you more about
there is one other thing about that, and this is kind of, since we're in Washington, it's about the role of government.
You start crooning now?
Yeah. So
that's the NSA coming into
the Brazilian
remarks.
government have played a pretty significant role in what has happened there. In Indonesia, it isn't that the government at a federal level don't want to do anything, but they have a weak system of public administration. There's a lot of corruption, particularly at a state or local level, and government simply cannot enforce much of what's there. And that's why government is such an important actor in this area, never, ever underestimate that.
Okay. Any more questions? No, we usually have a lot of people stay afterwards to ask. Bill Millen.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I mean, sustainability has a sort of a common sense meaning, but in this particular case, could someone explain a little bit more about what constitutes sustainable? The definition?
I think that's a great question.
Well, in terms of the roundtables, do you mean?
In terms of, for example, sustainable soil.
Right. So each of those commodities goes through a multi-stakeholder process by which the principles and criteria are defined to define sustainability, basically. So it means different things in different places, and it means different things for different commodities. But in general, as Gavin said, in terms of the Consumer Goods Forum commitment, as well as in what WWF is committed to, is we are committed to zero deforestation for beef production, for soy production. There's plenty of land out there. Deforestation doesn't need to happen to increase production.
But I think many of us use the definition, which I can never remember, which is the Gro Harlem Brundtland one about meeting today's needs in such a way that future generation can meet their needs. Anyone who knows that quote? Kerry.
Well, no, I was just going to add that I think for many of these commodities, we really like to think about it as responsible production. I think it remains to be seen what ultimately will constitute sustainability. But I think when we talk about, with the information that we have, doing the best we can to manage and produce these commodities in a responsible way, and I think people can understand that and can support that, and reducing the key impacts being an important part of that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Is Marilyn from Chief of Staff of Steve Cohen.
My question was for Unilever in terms of the 1.5 million tons of palm oil that you'll get from a sustainable source by 2015. What is that in percentage of total usage that you expect to have by 2015?
So that's actually 100%. We buy 1.5 million tons, and the commitment is that all of it should be sustainably sourced. I think it's important to say that in the first phase of that, we are using what are called a book and claim mechanism of the so-called green palm certificates. So, one green palm certificate equals 1 ton of sustainably cultivated palm. It doesn't mean yet that we can trace the palm that goes into Dove all the way back to the plantation on which it's grown. What it does mean is that farmers who have gone to the trouble of getting themselves certified are rewarded for that, but we at this stage can't trace it all the way back. We will, when we've achieved our 2015 target, then commit to source 100% from what are called certified segregated sources. So I could tell you, where the palm oil had come that was in your Skippy peanut butter or whatever it was.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you. We've got a briefing with Walmart and Conservation International next week discussing food security, which is another very relevant topic along with deforestation. So look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.